Hi folks, I would like to talk to you a little bit about Uri Bronfenbrenner and tell you why I really like his theories, and it's not only because he's my favorite go-to name for Starbucks or Panera's, just kidding. Bronfenbrenner is, let's remember the time when he's writing, it's 60s, 70s, and Bronfenbrenner is writing at a time when the psychoanalytic tradition is still quite prominent. The psychoanalytic tradition, which you read about, which talks a lot about internal dynamics and processes, and even Erickson, where those internal dynamics are affected by the world, there's still a lot of focus on what's inside the person. And also, behaviorism is starting to take off, and you read about that too, which really almost takes the person out of the equation. There's nothing going on in the person's head, it's all response to stimuli. And what Bronfenbrenner is adding to this, also remember that Vygotsky's work is not widely known in the West at this point. So Bronfenbrenner is adding the idea that our environment, or the roles that we find ourselves in, the expectations that go along with those roles, can help shape behavior in a very powerful way. So it goes beyond a psychoanalytic internal drive, and it goes beyond simple reward and punishment, and to really embrace the complexity of the environment. We'll get back to complexity in a minute. The other thing that's happening at around some of the same time is that there are, oh, sorry, wrong roles. There are some classic psychology experiments going on. I'm going to tell you about a few of them, but not in detail, so you can do some digging around. I'm going to give you some links so you can see the videos to these, but all in all, you might have to go digging a little bit to find out more details if you're interested. The first is Stanley Milgram's shocking findings. Some of you have heard about Milgram's experiments that have to do with usually framed as obedience. And why am I bringing them up here? Because they point to the idea that when you are put in a certain situation, there's certain expectations, you see something as your role, it could be a very powerful driver of behavior. Milgram's experiments, of course, are the ones where someone is brought into the lab, told that they are going to need to teach someone else to memorize a list of words. That someone else is then brought into another room, and the subject of the experiment is told that if that person gets an answer wrong, they are supposed to deliver a shock via a machine with little labels on it, and kind of progressively higher shocks. And the idea is that the person who is sent to the other room is, of course, not receiving shocks as an actor, but the subject who is being studied hears what the actor is saying, doesn't see the actor, but hears yelling and screaming. And then the question is, how far will someone go up the amount of electricity shock provided? And the kind of unsettling truth was that a surprising number of people went surprisingly high. And there are lots of variants on this. I'm not going to get into the details, but the idea is that one of the drivers was the idea that this was taking place in a lab at Yale University with people in a white coat telling you to do certain things. So you could see it as being obedient, but you could also talk about how one sees their own expectations vis-a-vis experts, quote unquote. And when this experiment was done elsewhere with not people wearing white coats, the amount of shock people were willing to give went significantly lower. And it was something about the social setup of that experiment that caused the impact. The second is Zimbardo's captive aiding experiment. These experiments would be very hard to conduct these days. These are in the bad old days before ethical review of research studies. Zimbardo's experiment is pretty wild. He's at Stanford. He asked for volunteers to participate in the study, and he basically created a prison in the basement of the site building, and half the people in the study randomly distributed, randomly assigned. Half were going to be guards and half were going to be prisoners, and they, over break, there was a very realistic setup. The prisoners were picked up by a police car and brought over to the psych department, and there wasn't a whole lot of guidance given to anyone really, including the guards. And Zimbardo wanted to see, well, what happened. And what happened is that the guards, by and large, started abusing their power and being sort of cruel and unusual to the quote-unquote inmates. I guess they're quote-unquote guards also. They're all Stanford undergraduates who volunteer for this thing. And the inmates are shown or seen to be really kind of degenerating psychologically, and sometimes they're crying, they're depressed, sometimes they're acting out. Basically, it's a very disturbing type of studies, and Bardo talks about it as evil. You could see in that YouTube. He also has a TED talk on this, showing us the origins of evil. Be that as it may, I think it shows us the power of the setting and the situation and the situational expectations, and to go back to one of the terms we've used a lot, a schema of how one is supposed to act in certain ways, under certain circumstances. Here with disturbing manifestations. Ashes, no pun available. Sorry, we all run out sometimes. Conformity study. This is a really interesting one. You actually see, I think it's Zimbardo who introduces the study on the YouTube here, but it's not Zimbardo's study. This, in some ways, is the most surprising to me. And basically, you'll see they show someone 3 lines drawn on a piece of paper and ask that person which is line A longer or shorter than line B. There's an obvious answer, but they put this research subject on at a long table with 4 other people who answer first, and all of those people they're making believe they're also research participants, but they're really in on it. And each of those people gives the answer of that's incorrect, really. If A is actually longer than B, they'll say, no, B is longer. Yeah, absolutely. And then by the time it gets to that last person, you have 4 people who've already kind of stated the incorrect reality, and it comes up to that person, and then that person goes along with it and says, yeah, B is longer, which, again, is something around the power of one's social context and social situation. It's much more complex, but I really like these experiments, and I like to talk about them when we talk about Bronf, who really is known for connecting the broader society with the individual development. As I mentioned, Bronfenbrenner's theory really has to do with complexity, or really is marked by complexity, and complexity is always a blessing and a curse when it comes to people like educators who want to actually go out and do something in the world. Complexity, on the one hand, you could say, well, there's so much going on, the system is so complicated, how could I move a whole system? What use is it? And you can kind of throw up your hands. I hope that's not how people are reading this. The more positive reading here is that there are lots of different ways to intervene to affect the lives of individuals, and that we shouldn't, that's number one. Number two, we really shouldn't be quick to accept these kind of silver bullets. If you just do X, Y will happen. because we understand the complexity of how environments interact with the individual, and even parts of the environment that the individual has no contact with. Even this exosystem impacts on an individual. Another idea that I like is the idea of reciprocal influence, which is the idea that not only are we impacted upon by our environment, but we shape the environment as well. And this is really important. In some ways it's obvious, but it's not always kept in mind. There are our students. We think about how the class will impact them. They impact us as well. And for some, maybe a negative example, there are kids who push our buttons in a classroom, and they will impact how we are as educators in that classroom, and that will impact the experience of other students who are in the classroom. So, then you get this back and forth interaction that affects, between teacher and student, that affects the entire ecosystem there. And it's a much more, it is neither the individual as a passive recipient of the environment, like in behavioral theories, nor is it that the individual is all there is to the story, like there might be in a classic psychoanalytic approach. And the idea here is that people and their environment shape one another, not just one direction. The other, or the last point here, is the idea that ecologies are what we call nested. No, I'm not going to make a little nest come out. You were expecting that, I know. But I'm sticking with the Russian dolls here. And what we've got are ecologies that are nested within ecologies. So what the ecology is depends on whose story you're trying to tell. So I could describe a school by describing it by the point of view of the student. Here's the student's microsystem. Here's the student's exosystems. I could also describe a school through the lens of an educator. Here's the teacher's microsystems. Here's the teacher's exosystems. Some of that's going to overlap, and that's the point, that these people's ecologies are intertwined in that way. So there will be things that are in both the student and the teacher's ecologies that they have in common, relationship with the principal or something like that. But there'll be things that are out in the teacher's world that impact on the kid because the teacher's ecology is relevant to the kid's ecology. And just to make a big mess out of this, this is a lovely picture of nested ecologies, but don't freak out because the next one's going to be a little bit better. So let's say we start with, this is the kind of classic Bronf and Brenner ecology model. So we have an individual, a student in the school, and that's a student has microsystem, mesosystem, exosystem, macrosystem, and chronosystem across the bottom. So let's take, for example, their microsystem. Their microsystem involves their teachers, peers, blah, 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 but let's stick with the teachers. Now, we could also, so this is the story from the point of view of the individual who is the student. The student has a microsystem that includes the teacher. We could then layer the teacher's microsystem, the teacher's ecology onto the student's ecology. And you see how it's starting to get kind of messy. But this new individual with the yellow circle is the teacher. They are related to the student's original microsystem because they're part of it. So they have this relationship to the microsystem, but you could see, it might be a little hard to see this yellow triangle here, but you could see that the teachers then have their own batch of microsystems, some of which will interact and some of which won't. Now, what is this all about other than to say things are mighty complex and mighty messy? it also, I think, it speaks to educational leaders, speaks to everyone, but I'll speak to educational leaders for a moment, because it requires educational leader to look at their system as a whole. And if you focus too much on one part of the ecology, then other parts are going to creep in without your intention or without your planning. So yes, we say everything is about the student. The experience of the teacher and what's happening in their ecology is a huge piece of that. So yes, everything's about the student, but if there are bad relationships among teachers, and teachers don't feel safe to share with one another, emotionally safe to share with one another their ideas, for example, or the teachers feel like they're not respected or whatever it is, that is going to be an issue for the child. And you, as a leader, have to deal with these things. That we can't take little pieces of our school. We can't say that we could look at parts but not the whole. And it also has ramifications for teacher learning. So, for example, we expect teachers, we have some new idea, this is a new curriculum, we want the teachers to, and I keep talking about teachers, it doesn't have to be teachers, it could be any setting, but we want people to implement something new, and we have to keep in mind that those people, even though they're not our students, they are the teachers, these teachers have certain roles and expectations already. They have relationships outside of the school, and they have certain belief systems, all play into this idea of, are they going to implement and learn what you want them to implement and learn? And again, we sometimes tend to say, well, here's the new curriculum, go do it, or even we'll give you a training session or two. And it doesn't, it kind of gets back to this view of an individual as a learning machine. You just give them something and expect them to change. And what Bronf and Brenner adds to the conversation is that there's a change occurs within a very complex and dynamic system.